And so let's talk about Davos, because that's the WEF people, the World Economic Forum. And so I'll tell you a little story about them and how much they care about what you bloody peasants think. So a couple of years ago, I formulated this Alliance for Responsible Citizenship with a handful of people in the UK and a stellar group of advisors, and it's spread itself out now internationally with some real effect. And we had about 4,500 people come to the UK a month ago, and that went very nicely. And you might say, well, how do we know that you people aren't just another bunch of globalist utopians and it's another conspiratorial cabal and to hell with the little guy? And here's what I would say to that. We made every single thing our speaker said public. It's all on the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship website. And so you can see exactly what we're up to because we've been radically transparent. And then you might say, well, what's the consequence of that? And here's the consequence. At our first conference, we had a arena event that attracted 12,000 people, where some of the primary people from the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship spoke directly to the public. But the fact that we've released all these videos enables us now to contrast ourselves and our communication ability with the WEF, for example. So at the moment, our videos are outperforming the WEF videos by an order of magnitude. And so why is this relevant? Well, the WEF has been around for decades as the Davos globalist types conspire in their elitist bubble to manipulate the planet to their own benefit, and to hell with you peasants. And the proof of that is the fact that no one watches any of their content. Well, why? It's because they haven't put any effort into publicizing their content, because they don't really give a damn what you think or what you know. And so the ARC, for example, we're kind of a bare bones organization. We've only been around for 2 years and we're still struggling to find economic purchase. And we've managed to produce a communication network that has been radically more successful at communicating with the public than the WF, despite the fact that they've been around for decades. And Carney is part of that Davos crowd. And if you think that they care what you think, then you should give some thought to the fact that this is going to be a very short election, and that the reason for that is that Carney would rather not that you didn't know what he's like or what he's up to, because he has a planet to save, and you dim-witted populists are just going to get in the way with your idiot concern for your heating and your air conditioning and the odd vacation and for the economic future of your children. And so we'll unwind right to the beginning. Look, Carney looks impressive on paper, and I can understand why Canadians think he's the man for the moment, because he was vetted, for example, by the Brits, who put him in charge of the Bank of England. But I can also tell you what happened when he was in charge of the Bank of England. And I know this because I know people who were affected, and I mean rich people, who were affected by his decisions as head of the Bank of England. So the policies that Carney put forward as the head of the Bank of England produced an asset boom. And what that means is that stock prices went upward radically. And what that meant was that the people who have a tremendous amount of money got a lot more money as a consequence of Carney's maneuvering. And that, I would say, shows you that's a good case example of exactly who he prioritizes, despite his protestations, when push comes to shove. And so the people that I've been talking to, and these are very wealthy people and they're very well connected, although they have a conscience, as it turns out, we're not very happy that the quantitative easing principles that Carney put into place in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis made the rich much richer and the rest of everyone else, and that meant everyone but the extremely rich, substantially poorer. And so that's an example of what happened when Carney was running the Bank of England. And so there's no evidence that he's like a friend of yours. Now, then we might address another issue. It's like the issue of Trump and his saber rattling. Well, the accusations that have gone out with regards to Pierre Poilievre is that Poilievre is just MAGA light. He's a Make America Great advocate, which he's not, by the way, and that a vote for Poilievre is really a vote for the Trump types. Well, let's see what Trump himself thinks. Well, a few days ago, when this was recorded, Trump came out and said he didn't give a damn who ran Canada. And so, we can conclude from that what we might as Canadians. One thing we can conclude, and you want to put this in perspective, is that the new American administration has a lot of countries to keep track of, and Canada is the US's major trading partner, and we should get some due consideration. But that doesn't mean that the new administration has had Canada in its sights, so to speak, or even understands the Canadian political landscape particularly well. And it's my impression, and I've done some digging, that Trump didn't understand that his comments about Canada and the tariffs and his threat to turn Canada into the 51st state would be utilized by the Liberals to resurrect them from the well-deserved death they had already managed and to raise them up above the Conservatives. He didn't know that. Now you could say, well, he should have. It's like, yeah, fair enough, but it doesn't matter because he didn't. And so I don't know if he would have cared if he did know, but he didn't know. But the upshot is the Liberals have leapt ahead. Now, then you might say that's no problem because Mark Carney, man, he's got the international cachet to put that orange-haired son of a bitch in his place. And then you might think, well, what does Trump think about that? And what Trump said was he'd rather negotiate with a liberal. Now, you could say, well, that's because he thinks Carney is much more confident and competent than Poilievre, who he described as no friend to him and no friend to the MAGA movement, by the way. Or you could read it, and I would read it this way, knowing something about Trump, that because Trump is radically pro-American and because the free trade era has radically come to an end, that Trump is looking at Canada thinking if Canadians are foolish enough to elect that piker Carney, who's a retread of the worst of Trudeau, although much more effective on the managerial front, let's say, then we'll be able to crush him extremely effectively at the negotiating table. We have contempt for everything he stands for, and that would be a real good thing for us Americans as we pursue our own self-interest. And so if you think that Trump is intimidated by Carney and his international expertise, you don't understand the Americans, and you certainly don't understand Trump, because not only is that not the case, and I know it's not the case because I have extensive contacts in DC, which I have carefully developed over the last 5 years, precisely for moments like this. And they tell me what's going on. It's not like Trump and the MAGA Republicans think that Carney is a credible, canny negotiator that's going to bring them to heel. Quite the bloody contrary. Now, can Poilievre step up and do a better job than Carney? Well, Canadians tend to get overshadowed at the bargaining table with regards to the Americans because they're very canny negotiators, and we have a lot to learn in that regard. But what we could do, and perhaps would do with a Conservative government if they got their act together, is foster Canadian independence from the United States in a very real way, remove borders to interprovincial trade, crisscross the country with pipelines, radically improve our fossil fuel-based economy, move our refining capacity back into Canada, develop something approximating a real industrial policy, and maybe on something approximating a wartime footing, given the magnitude of the threat from the Americans, deal more effectively with the Germans and the Japanese, for example, who've already indicated their inexhaustible thirst for Canadian resources, make ourselves into the industrial powerhouse that Canada could most clearly be, indicate our willingness to contribute to military defense in the manner that we should, given the necessity for that in an increasingly unstable world, signal to the Americans thereby that we're willing to pursue our weight, but that we don't bloody well need them if push comes to shove, and then sit down with them at the negotiating table like a real competitor and contender and potential ally. And if you think it's going to happen under Carney, well, you can take Trump at his word. He already indicated his contempt for the liberal types. And he said that, he's no friend of Poilievre. Well, you want to read behind the lines a little bit. And as far as I can tell, what that means is that Trump would rather deal with a contemptible, weak-kneed liberal than with a conservative who actually puts Canada first. And so don't be thinking that Carney's the guy with the cachet to put Trump back on his heels, because Trump has faced people who are a lot more intimidating than Carney. And it's not only that, like Carney stands for everything that the more radical fringe of the Democratic Party stands for in the United States. And it's not like Trump has any sympathy for the Democrats as a whole, and certainly not for the more leftist eco-fringe of the Democrats. And it's clearly the case that if Carney was an American politician, he'd be Gavin Newsom. Like, he'd be exactly the sort of person that's pushed exactly the policies that Trump can't tolerate that have emanated from the Democrats. And so it's a delusion